The Trump legacy is rather dark. On the international stage, what he did as president was to actively engage in attempts to dismantle the liberal international order, which was built after World War II. And he tried hard to dismantle this type of order by withdrawing the United States from various international agreements. In particular, he was a strong enemy of the European Union. He went far away from the traditional Republican skepticism towards the EU. He was a strong supporter of Brexit. His politically appointed ambassadors in EU countries actively sought to create a new type of nation states network as opposed to the EU as it is today. On the American stage, Trump worked very hard to undermine the liberal democracy. Was the very first American president who did that. And this puts newly elected President Biden in a very awkward position because the level of mistrust between Western allies is at record heights right now. Not because people distrust Biden. No, they do trust Biden, but they ask a simple and obvious question. Trump happened. Why should we trust you again since another Trump might happen again? Most recently, he even was even part of an attempt to attack the electoral outcome. And on the very, very local level, Donald Trump is the guy who pushed the Republican Party over the edge, which means that we may not see a Republican president because of that in the next 2, 3, maybe 4 electoral cycles in America.
There is a continuum between internal and external. He speculated internally the discontent of a large swath of population that you can see all over the world, which is basically low-income population that was disenfranchised by the delocalization of industry. He speculated that with this type of discourse in order to gain electoral power. And that is, he surfed on a wave. He did not create the wave. And that's probably important to remember because the wave is still there. It's not going to go away tomorrow. His politics resonate in many places around the world, his discourse. I would be more cautious than Sorin because I'm more optimistic than Sorin. And I would be more cautious to say that Democrats will have 2 or 3 electoral cycles secured for now. And I'm an optimist. You know, if a pessimist says we cannot go worse than this, and I'm an optimist, I say, yes, we can. I think we should be really, really worried. I think Isaiah Berlin made this very clear in his advices for the 21st century, in which he was cautioning against righteousness. He was cautioning against extremist views on any side and on righteous idealism, because he said, you know, young spirits are very easily inflamed by ideals of utopia, and there's there's no price that doesn't worth being paid. in order to arrive to that utopia. And you know, you need to break some eggs to make an omelet, he says. But so they keep on breaking eggs, and there is no omelet inside. But the eggs keep being broken, and those eggs are human lives. What worries me is the fact that I was talking yesterday with a friend who has a daughter in an American university. He's from Canada. He's in the he's an intellectual, and he's saying, you know, I'm talking to my daughter. He's a progressive liberal, and he says, I'm talking to my daughter, and I realize that she's trained in a certain type of language, and I'm not talking political correctness, but a political language. But she's trained in such a way that if you do not speak that language, you are not allowed to take part into the political debate. So what worries me the most is how we create a language to describe the political and social space that devoice a lot of voices. The very fact that the language is made to exclude is a problem.
Yes, in my view, we had the first generation of human rights in late 19th century and early 20th century, focusing mostly on political and civil rights. The right to vote mainly, and the right to be a part in the political body, so to speak, the body politic. And then you have the second generation of human rights after World War II, focusing on social and economic issues and some cultural issues. And now we're in the middle of a process where a third generation of human rights are evolving. We could roughly call them rights to identity, be it individual identity or collective identity. And this is why we have women rights movements, children rights movements, LGBT rights movements, African American rights movements, various minorities, and so on. These are basically identity rights and are a combination between social rights and cultural rights. They are not purely cultural nor purely social. These rights are emerging as rights. For instance, the European Court of Human Rights described the gay right to marriage as an emerging right. It is a human right because it is recognized by certain countries, but not a universal right, so it's an emerging right. So we have dozens of identity emerging rights, which is good, which is okay. This is a way in which society gets to include the difference within it. This, agreed, makes consensus more difficult than a universal, uniform framework would have made it. But nonetheless, it's more dynamic, and it reflects more the values of individuals and groups, and ultimately generates more freedom and more space for debate, for people feeling secure, and for people having their voices heard. Black Lives Matter in particular is an interesting example of this type of identity movement. And it clearly belongs to this third generation of rights and in particular civil rights activism. And I don't see it as a threat, maybe a threat to a particular type of liberal democracy, the one that was built after World War II and which now is in decline. The rise of populism on the left and on the right tells us that the old liberal order is in decline and we have to invent a new liberal order. I'm not saying liberal democracy is in decline, but a particular form of liberal democracy is clearly in decline, and a new type of liberal democracy should emerge from this.
The liberal discourse that is taught in colleges today is the liberal discourse of the second wave, right? And that excludes a lot of others, including the others that created Trumpism. There's always pitfalls. No matter how well-intentioned we are, there will always be things that happen because we act in a field of a complex field of power, and that includes cultural determinants, socioeconomic positions, and so on. I would like to remind you what Wade Davis said. It's an anthropologist who said, remember that the others are not failed attempts to become you. Okay, so all those movements and ideas will be adopted and adapted in different ways, and we do not really know, and we cannot project the way how they will be, especially because at the global level we have right now competing discourses, competing grand discourses, and there is the pitfall of creating different rights for different groups. That's a pitfall. I hope we don't fall in it, but it is a danger that we should be aware of.
We all like to frame technology as the usual culprit of what happens today. I kind of disagree with this take, but I agree it's a widespread take these days. I don't think this happens because of technology and because of the digital revolution. The two phenomena happened in about the same time, but this doesn't matter that one is caused by the other. We had propaganda, malign propaganda, during the Cold War for a number of decades, and this new type of malign propaganda is not different from the old one. The only major difference is that the malign propaganda during the Cold War was not bought by the general population in Western democracies, while today these fringe conspiracy theories and everything else in between are widely bought by the same population. So the problem is why today they are bought, while 30, 40, 50 years ago, they were not bought. They were bought by a minority. I don't think that technology made them more attractive. I simply think that we are at an end of a large political cycle, which started in the 80s and which generated the neoliberal consensus. For instance, in America, all US presidents from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama were Reaganites, all of them without exception. You were on the right or on the left within the neoliberal consensus, and this consensus is clearly broken, on the one hand. On the other hand, the post-World War II type of liberal democracy is also in crisis. So we have two crises at the same time: the end of a grand social consensus and the limits of a liberal political model built between, say, 1950s till 2010, for instance. These two things happened simultaneously after 2010, and they generated a perfect storm where people don't live in the same consensus. The consensus is broken, and you don't feel your voice is taken into consideration because the political system created by the liberal democracy is also broken. And people knowing that or feeling that may very well go wild. And this, in my view, is why malign propaganda is bought today, while it wasn't bought 30, 40, or 50 years ago. It's not because of technology. Technology helps, but to a very limited extent. The problem is not with the technology. The problem is that we don't have the new consensus formed yet to reassure people that we live in the same conceptual framework. And we don't have the new liberal democracy institutions and practices yet to ensure people that their voice is heard and they are taken into consideration. These are the main problems that created today's digital storm of illiberal advance, of wild conspiracy theories, and so on.
This is why Black Lives Matter is so important. It's because if you look what happened within the Black Lives Matter, it's a banner, but it's not exclusive. It's a banner that talks about the inclusion of difference within the rights sphere, but does not exclude others' participation. Therefore, you had during the protests very interesting phenomenon like the how they call the hockey mothers for Black Lives Matters or something like that, in which you had a cordon of white women, mostly mothers, who were coming in the front of the protest in order to open the way. And this is not the only way in which those kind of things happen. For example, you have the pipe closers or the valve turners. Yeah, the valve turners, which are it happened. In fact, there were 4 orchestrated, but there were 4 people who became the valve turners, who 2 years ago stopped the valves of the oil flowing from Canada to the United States. They were all 4 white, male in their 50s, well established, and their movement was not one of resistance against, it was one of refusal. And that's the key. The key is to refusing what happens, not resist, because resistance will bring back the cycle. So what they did, they closed the valves and they waited to be arrested in order to have a voice in the court of law. So by challenging within the framework, you can expand the framework, right? And that's why, again, those kind of movements are so important. How to build back? If Biden said how to build back, I would quote Denzel Washington. Well, you need to fall forward. Don't think that you need to fall back on something. Just go, and if you fail big, but fall forward and try to find a way, a third way. The only thing that stays on two legs is humans, but every structure stays at least on three legs. So we need to rediscover the non-excluded third and to get out of the binomial thinking. And that's our, in my opinion, the biggest challenge of the new political order.